I didn't know my life would split into a before and an after the moment I found a folder on our coffee table. Thick, printed, undeniable. For 7 years, I believed I had chosen love over pride. I believed I had proven my parents wrong. I believed that loyalty, patience, and sacrifice were enough to build something unbreakable. I was wrong. When I married Daniel Hayes, people whispered that I was lucky. My parents warned me. My mother called him charming but small. My father said, "Men like him don't want a partner, they want a ladder." I stopped attending family dinners after that. I chose Daniel. I chose us. I paid for his tuition. I paid for the condo. I helped his parents keep their failing auto repair shop alive. I believed in him when no one else did. And he thanked me by telling his colleagues that we were separated, by telling people I had health problems, by telling his married manager that I understood their affair. The night everything collapsed wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. There were no shattered plates, no screaming neighbors. There was just a hotel ballroom, a microphone, and my husband joking about needing a divorce lawyer to protect his assets. Assets I built. I remember the way the room smelled, champagne and cologne. I remember how my palms went cold. I remember 30 pairs of eyes glancing at me like I was a prop in his story. And I remember walking home alone that night, heels in my hand, mascara drying stiff against my skin. 6 months later, he was demoted. 6 months after that, I learned the truth. The affair, the lies, the humiliation. I had chosen him over my family, and he erased me from his life like I had never existed. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when the woman who built you decides she's done carrying you, and what happens when the truth finally catches up. Before Daniel Hayes became the man who embarrassed me in a room full of strangers, he was just a warm smile behind a chipped counter. Back then, I was 32. I worked in corporate finance for a multinational firm downtown, the kind of job that looked impressive on paper and felt like a slow leak in real life. 12-hour days weren't unusual. Most mornings I ran on caffeine, deadlines, and the fear of falling behind. There was a diner 3 blocks from my office, cramped, loud, and always smelling like burnt coffee and old grease. The vinyl seats were cracked in a way that snagged your skirt when you slid in too fast. The place wasn't charming. It was practical. Fast service, strong coffee, no questions. Daniel worked there. He was 24, and he had this way of looking at people like they were worth his time, even when they weren't. He could remember regulars' orders without writing anything down. He laughed easily, but not in a fake way, in a way that made you think he'd survived something and still chose softness. I noticed him because he was kind. One morning I was supposed to meet someone for breakfast, a man from our legal department. We'd been emailing for weeks. I'd done that thing busy women do, where we convince ourselves a date can fit neatly between meetings like a calendar block. He didn't show. I sat there 40 minutes checking my phone, the embarrassment climbing up my throat like heat. Daniel kept refilling my coffee without asking, like he could sense I needed something steady in front of me. Eventually I muttered, almost to myself, I guess I got stood up. Daniel leaned in slightly and said, "Then he's an idiot." He disappeared for a moment and came back with a slice of apple pie. "On the house," he said, like he wasn't offering dessert. He was offering a lifeline. That was the first real conversation we had. It wasn't flirtation. Not at first. It was the simplest kind of comfort. Someone seeing you in a humiliating moment and refusing to let you drown in it. After that, I started going more often. Not just for coffee. For him. Over time, I learned pieces of his life the way you learn the layout of a room you keep returning to. Daniel had dropped out of community college 2 years earlier because he couldn't afford to keep going. His parents ran a tiny auto repair shop that never seemed to earn enough to catch up with bills. They lived in a cramped apartment above the shop, and Daniel still slept in the smallest room like he was trying not to take up space. He was saving tips to help them pay for roof repairs, and he never complained. That's what got me. Not his looks, not his laugh, but the quiet dignity. The way he kept showing up, kept working, kept smiling at rude customers like their cruelty didn't reach him. He told me he wanted to go back to school. Marketing, communications, something where he could build a real career, he said, eyes bright with hope and embarrassment, like wanting more was something he needed to apologize for. I believed him. I started showing up even on days I worked from home. 6 months later, I asked him out properly, not between sips of coffee, but with intention. He said yes. My parents did not. My father owned a chain of dental clinics. My mother came from old money and carried it like armor. They weren't cruel in a dramatic way. They were worse. They were polite, controlled, the kind of disapproval that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't have to. When I brought Daniel to a family dinner, my mother barely spoke to him. She smiled without warmth. She asked him questions that sounded innocent but landed like tests. After Daniel left, my father called me into his study. He sat back in his chair and said, "He's using you." And my mother, calm as a surgeon, added, "Men like that see dollar signs when they look at you. No education, no prospects, no class. You'll regret this." I remember standing there with my hands clenched so tightly my nails left half moons in my palms, thinking, they don't know him. So I stopped going to dinners. I chose Daniel, and when I married him a year later, small ceremony, simple vows, my parents didn't come. His parents cried through the entire thing. And I told myself that was the price of choosing love. The first year of our marriage felt like proof that I had made the right choice. We moved into the condo I had purchased 2 years before meeting Daniel. 2 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the river that turned gold at sunset. It wasn't extravagant, but it was solid, secure, ours. Daniel quit the diner 3 weeks after the wedding. I told him to focus on school. I paid his tuition at a state university and helped him enroll in a business communications program. He studied hard. I'll never take that away from him. He made the dean's list twice. At night, we'd sit at the kitchen counter, him reviewing case studies, me answering emails from overseas clients. Sometimes he'd look up and say, "I wouldn't be here without you." And I'd smile, because that felt like partnership. I also started helping his parents more consistently. Their auto repair shop needed new equipment. Refrigeration units for fluids were failing. Rent was behind during a slow quarter. I covered it. Quietly. No speeches, no resentment. At least not at first. When Daniel graduated, I used professional connections to help him land an interview at a major consulting firm. He got hired as a junior analyst. His starting salary was modest compared to mine, but I remember how proud he looked the morning he left in his first tailored suit. He bought it with his first paycheck. I told myself that was independence blooming. The first year at this firm was steady. He asked me for advice on presentations. He vented about difficult managers. We still had dinner together most nights. On weekends, we visited his parents or went hiking outside the city. But somewhere in the second year, something subtle shifted. It started with the promotion. Daniel moved into a mid-level role. His salary increased. His confidence did too, which I encouraged. I wanted him to feel powerful in his own right. Then came the changes. He began spending more on himself. Designer shoes, watches I'd never heard of. He started going to an upscale gym that cost more per month than his parents' grocery bill. He booked salon appointments for image upgrades, he called them. Teeth whitening, skin treatments, subtle cosmetic work. When I raised an eyebrow once and said gently, "Is all of this necessary?" he laughed. "It's an investment. Appearance matters in consulting." I didn't argue. I still paid the mortgage, groceries, utilities, property taxes. I was still transferring money to his parents when the shop had a slow month. His paychecks went toward his image. I told myself it was temporary. Then he stopped inviting me to work events. In the beginning, he always asked me to come. Quarterly socials, team dinners, client receptions. I shook hands with his managers. I smiled politely through small talk. But after his promotion, he started going alone. "They're boring," he'd say. "You won't enjoy standing around listening to consultants brag." "I don't mind," I'd answer. "I want to support you." "It's fine," he'd insist. "I'll only stay an hour." The first time he came home late, past midnight, he blamed traffic. The second time, he blamed a client dinner that ran long. The third time, he didn't explain at all. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening, staring at the untouched meal I'd made, hearing the click of the door at 1:30 a.m. "You could have texted," I said quietly. He shrugged off his jacket. "You worry too much." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was distance. Small, almost invisible fractures. Then one afternoon, I received a message from a woman I didn't know. Her name was Patricia. She said she was the wife of one of Daniel's coworkers, and she asked me if I knew my husband was telling people we were separated. I stared at that message for a full 10 minutes before typing back. "What do you mean?" She said Daniel had been introduced at a company dinner as single. She said he had been flirting openly with several men in the firm. She said her own husband mentioned him often. She told me she felt I deserved to know. When I confronted Daniel that night, he laughed. "A jealous middle-aged woman," he said dismissively. "Her husband probably tried something and she's projecting." He stepped closer, brushing a hand against my cheek like reassurance. You trust me, don't you? I did, or at least I wanted to. But something inside me had begun to tighten, like a thread pulled too far. A month later, another wife reached out. Her name was Denise, and this time the story was worse. Denise's message arrived on a Thursday afternoon while I was in between calls. Her name appeared in my inbox with no context, no greeting, just a question. Are you aware that your husband left the Midtown Regent Hotel bar last Friday night with his senior manager? My chest tightened before my mind even processed the words. I typed back carefully. I think you have the wrong person. Her response came quickly. Daniel Hayes, Consulting Division. I saw him myself. I read the message 3 times. The Midtown Regent was across the city. Daniel had told me he was at a late client dinner that night. He'd come home smelling faintly of cologne I didn't recognize, and whiskey he claimed he hadn't had much of. I confronted him again. This time his reaction wasn't laughter. It was irritation. You're doing this again? He snapped, pacing the living room. You're listening to strangers instead of trusting your husband. 2 different women, I said quietly. 2 different stories. Jealous wives, he shot back. Do you know how threatened some people feel when someone younger succeeds? He turned it around effortlessly. Why are you so insecure? He added. That word stayed with me. Insecure. Like the problem was my fear, not his behavior. I tried to let it go. But the next major company event made that impossible. Daniel had just been promoted to senior consultant. The firm was hosting a celebration in a downtown hotel ballroom. Open bar, catered dinner, executives flying in from other branches. He told me not to come. It's just work, he said. It'll be boring. I want to be there, I replied. I've supported you through every step. He hesitated, jaw tightening. Fine, he said eventually, but don't make it awkward. Don't make it awkward. The ballroom was bright and loud, glittering with chandeliers and polished marble floors. The air smelled of champagne and perfume. Daniel looked sharp in a navy suit I had bought him for our anniversary. When we walked in together, he introduced me to 2 people near the entrance, rushed, almost reluctant, and then drifted away. I stood by the bar, watching. He laughed easily. Too easily. His hand rested briefly on a man's forearm during conversation. He leaned close when someone whispered in his ear. His body language was confident, practiced. I tried joining one of the groups. Hi, I said politely. I'm Daniel's wife. There was a pause. A man blinked. Wife? A woman next to him frowned slightly. I didn't know he was married. Another voice chimed in, almost casually. I thought he was separated. My stomach dropped. Daniel stepped in smoothly. We've been going through some stuff, he said lightly, as if explaining away a scheduling conflict. He didn't look at me when he said it. At 9 o'clock, Daniel took the stage. He was already slightly tipsy. I could see it in the looseness of his smile. He thanked his team, talked about how hard he had worked, how far he had come. I built this, he said into the microphone. I came from nothing. Nothing. The word echoed. He didn't mention the tuition, the condo, the networking introductions, the years of financial support. He said he was self-made. The room applauded. Then he laughed and added, now that I'm finally making real money, I should probably hire a divorce lawyer to protect my assets. There was a split second of silence. Then nervous laughter. He winked at someone near the front. My ears rang. My vision narrowed. I could feel heat crawling up my neck. I walked toward him quietly and said under my breath, let's get some water. He turned, irritation flashing in his eyes. Can you not? He muttered. Then, louder, into the microphone. My wife worries too much. More laughter. I stood there, suddenly aware of every pair of eyes in the room. I wasn't his partner in that moment. I was a prop. I left without saying goodbye. It was cold outside. I walked the 40 minutes home in heels, each step echoing on the pavement. My hands went numb. By the time I reached the condo, my mascara had dried stiff against my cheeks. Daniel came home after midnight. You embarrassed me, he said, loosening his tie. I embarrassed you? I asked, voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. It was a joke, he snapped. You're too sensitive. We barely spoke after that night. We slept on opposite sides of the bed. We stopped eating dinner together. He came home later and later. I stopped asking questions. 6 months passed in that silent tension. Then, one afternoon, Daniel walked into the condo unexpectedly early. His eyes were red. He didn't greet me. He just sat down on the couch and stared at the wall. I've been demoted, he said flatly. Why? I asked. They've always had it out for me, he muttered. Politics, jealousy. Then he turned toward me. This is your fault. My breath caught. You've been negative for months, doubting me, questioning me. You jinxed this. I stared at him, trying to recognize the man I married. He demanded I pay for a lawyer so he could sue the company for wrongful demotion. That was the moment something inside me shifted. For the first time, instead of defending him, I decided to find out the truth. When Daniel told me his demotion was my fault, I didn't scream. That's what surprises people when I tell them this part. I didn't throw a glass. I didn't call him names. I didn't storm out. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something inside me detach. You jinxed me, he repeated, pacing now. You've been negative for months, questioning me, doubting me. That energy affects things. Energy, I echoed softly. Yes, he said, pointing at me like he was making a logical argument. You never believed I could succeed on my own. I almost laughed. I had believed in him when my parents didn't. I had written tuition checks. I had transferred money to his parents' account when their shop couldn't make rent. I had used my professional reputation to help him land interviews. But I didn't list those things. Instead, I asked quietly, what exactly did they say when they demoted you? He hesitated. That my conduct had raised concerns. What conduct? He ran a hand through his hair. Office politics. People twisting things. And you want me to pay for a lawyer? Yes, he snapped. You make more than enough. This affects our future. Our future. The phrase sounded hollow. That night, while he showered, I sat at the kitchen counter, staring at my laptop screen. My reflection in the dark window looked older than 39, tired. 2 women had reached out to me. 2 different warnings. A public humiliation at a ballroom. A demotion tied to conduct. And I had chosen denial because loving him felt easier than confronting the truth. I asked myself something I had been avoiding for months. What have I been ignoring? The next day, instead of calling a lawyer for Daniel, I reached out to someone else. David. He worked at Daniel's firm, in a different department. We had met years earlier at a finance conference and stayed loosely in touch. Professional. Neutral. I invited him to lunch near his office. When he arrived, he looked uncomfortable before I even asked the question. Daniel was demoted, I said calmly. Do you know why? David stirred his coffee for a long time. It wasn't just performance, he admitted. I felt my pulse in my throat. Then what? He glanced around the restaurant like he was checking for witnesses. Are you sure you want to know? Yes. There are moments in life where your body understands the truth before your brain does. My fingers went cold. My stomach tightened. David lowered his voice. Daniel has been having an affair. The word didn't explode. It sank. With who? I asked, though part of me already knew. His senior manager. His name is Beatrice Bennett. Married. 3 kids. I inhaled slowly. How long? Over a year. Over a year. That meant it started shortly after his first promotion. David continued, almost reluctantly. They were careful at first, then careless. A work trip. Same hotel. People saw them leaving the same room. I stared at the tablecloth. Beatrice Bennett's wife found out, David added. She confronted Daniel at the office, in front of people. The image formed in my mind. Another woman standing in a lobby, voice shaking, demanding answers. What did Daniel say? I asked. David hesitated again. He told her to grow up, said Beatrice Bennett had made his choice. My chest tightened. There's more, David said quietly. I closed my eyes for half a second. Tell me. He's been telling people you two have an open marriage. The room felt smaller. What? He said you had medical issues, David continued. That you couldn't perform. That you agreed he could see other people. I felt heat flood my face. Not embarrassment, but humiliation so sharp it almost felt physical. Everyone thought you knew, David said gently. They thought you'd given permission. That was why no one had warned me. They believed I was complicit in my own disrespect. I nodded slowly, though my hands were shaking under the table. Thank you for telling me, I said, because composure was the only thing holding me upright. When I got home that afternoon, Daniel wasn't there. I stood in the living room, the room I had decorated, the couch I had chosen, the mortgage I paid, and felt the weight of 7 years press against my ribs. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop. If there was a wife, there were messages. If there were messages, there was proof. And if there was proof, then I would never again let him say this was about my negative energy. I found Jonathan Bennett within 10 minutes. Her social media was private, but her name wasn't common. Beatrice Bennett's last name was easy to locate through Daniel's company directory. From there, it was a simple search. Her profile picture was of a woman standing beside 3 children at a beach. Wind in their hair, sunlight behind them. She looked like someone who believed her life was stable. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. Hi, Jonathan Bennett. My name is Olivia Hayes. I'm Daniel's wife. I just found out about the affair. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. If you're willing to talk, I would appreciate it. She responded within an hour. I tried to find you months ago. Daniel told me you already knew. He said you were fine with it. My fingers trembled as I typed back. I was not fine. I was not aware. 2 days later, we met at a quiet coffee shop downtown. Jonathan Bennett looked tired, not dramatic, not hysterical, just drained. She placed a thick folder on the table between us. I printed everything, she said. Inside were screenshots, emails, messages from an app I had never heard of. Explicit, detailed, undeniable. Hotel reservations, photos, conversations about how stupid spouses are. One message stopped me cold. Daniel had written, "Olivia's too invested to leave. She built this life. She won't walk away." I felt my breath shorten. Another message? "Don't worry. She thinks we're working on our marriage. She'll never suspect anything real." Jonathan Bennett watched my face carefully. "He told me you had health problems," she said quietly. "He said you encouraged him to find happiness elsewhere." My throat tightened. "He told people at work that too," I admitted. Jonathan Bennett nodded slowly. "Beatrice Bennett's moved out. I filed for divorce. My kids are confused. I wanted you to know because no one deserves to be lied to like this." We sat there, two women bound not by friendship, but by the same man's deception. I didn't cry in front of her. I thanked her, took copies, locked the originals in a safe deposit box that afternoon. When I walked into my condo that evening, Daniel was already home. He was in a better mood than I had seen in weeks. He had poured himself a glass of wine. "Rough day?" he asked casually. I placed the folder on the coffee table. "Open it." He looked at it, confused at first, then cautious. "What is this?" "Open it." He flipped through the first few pages. The color drained from his face. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "This is fake," he said. "Jonathan Bennett is unstable. She's trying to ruin me." I didn't respond. "She fabricated this," he continued, flipping pages faster. "Edited screenshots. Anyone can do that." "I spoke to David," I said quietly. His eyes flicked up sharply. "I know about the open marriage lie," I continued. "I know about the medical problems. I know about the hotel." His jaw tightened. "You're twisting things," he said. "You're choosing strangers over your own husband." "I'm choosing evidence," I replied. He stood abruptly. "You have no idea how competitive that firm is. People want to tear each other down. Beatrice Bennett pursued me. I didn't chase him." "But you continued," I said. Silence. "You humiliated me," I added, voice steady. "You told people I couldn't satisfy my own husband." He rolled his eyes. "Oh my God, Olivia, it was an excuse. I had to say something." "About me?" "You're being dramatic." The dismissal hit harder than the betrayal. He tried another tactic, softer this time. "I made mistakes," he said, lowering his voice. "But you've been distant. You work all the time. I felt alone." I stared at him. "I paid your tuition," I said calmly. "I funded your career. I kept your parents' business alive. I attended events when you wanted me invisible, and you felt alone." "You're throwing money in my face now?" he snapped. "I'm stating facts." His expression shifted again. "You think you're better than me?" he said quietly. "That's the real issue." There it was. Not guilt. Resentment. "You can't stand that I succeeded," he continued. "You built me up and then hated that I didn't need you anymore." The projection was almost impressive. "I told you to leave," I said finally. He blinked. "What?" "The condo is in my name. I bought it before we married. You have 1 week to pack your things." "You can't do that," he said. "We're married. I have rights." "Then hire your lawyer." He shifted strategies again. Tears this time. "Please," he said. "We can fix this. I love you." Love. The word felt like a foreign language. "You loved being admired," I replied. "You loved being envied. You loved being desired." His voice hardened. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I regret staying this long." He left 3 days later. No dramatic goodbye. No apology. Just boxes. Silence. The faint smell of his cologne lingering in the hallway. I changed the locks that afternoon. I contacted my attorney and filed for divorce. When my lawyer reviewed the evidence, he nodded slowly. "This will be difficult for him," he said. "Very difficult." Daniel began calling within days. Texting. Leaving voicemails. "We can work this out. You're overreacting. I still love you. Don't throw everything away." I blocked his number. Then his parents called. "Daniel says you're divorcing him," his mother said. "Yes," I replied. "What happened?" "Ask your son." They stopped calling after that. A week later, my own father called. "Do you need anything?" he asked quietly. I hadn't heard that tone from him in years. "No," I said. But for the first time since the diner, I felt something shift. Not devastation. Not rage. Clarity. Daniel hadn't just cheated. He had rewritten our marriage into a story where I was weak, undesirable, and conveniently ignorant. And now, that story was collapsing. The house was quiet after Daniel left. Too quiet. I had imagined that once he was gone, I would feel triumphant, free. vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. 7 years of routine don't disappear just because someone packs a suitcase. The indentation of his pillow remained for days. One of his coffee mugs stayed in the cabinet because I couldn't bring myself to move it. His winter coat hung in the closet longer than it should have. I told myself I was strong. But strength doesn't cancel grief. At night, the silence was the worst. I would lie in the bed we once shared, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations in my mind. The diner, the apple pie, the way he once said, "I wouldn't be here without you." Was any of it real? Or had I fallen in love with potential, with the version of him I wanted to exist? I questioned my own judgment more than I questioned his betrayal. How did I not see it? How did I sit in that ballroom while strangers assumed I was separated and still go home with him? How did I accept "you're too sensitive" as an explanation? There is a particular kind of humiliation that comes from realizing other people knew about your spouse's affair before you did, that colleagues saw, that wives whispered, that someone had publicly confronted him. And I was the last to understand. The divorce proceedings began quietly. Paperwork, statements, bank disclosures. Daniel tried to claim emotional support compensation, that he had sacrificed opportunities to support my demanding career. When my attorney presented the evidence, the affair, the open marriage lie, the damage to my professional reputation, the claim dissolved quickly. Still, the legal process felt clinical, cold. The real pain wasn't financial. It was personal. One afternoon, I found myself parked outside the old diner. I hadn't planned to stop. I just turned without thinking. The place looked smaller than I remembered. The vinyl seats were still cracked. The smell of burnt coffee still lingered near the door. I sat in a booth and ordered pie. The waitress brought it without knowing the history of that slice, of that counter, of the woman I used to be. I stared at it and realized something. I had loved the version of Daniel who brought me comfort when I felt rejected. But that version of him existed in a very specific moment, when he needed nothing from me yet. Once he needed opportunity, status, elevation, love became secondary. I wasn't his partner. I was his launch pad. That realization hurt more than the affair, because it meant the foundation had been uneven from the beginning. One evening, about a month after he moved out, I received an email from an unknown address. It was from Daniel. He wrote, "You're destroying both our lives over a mistake. I was under pressure. I felt invisible. Beatrice Bennett made me feel powerful. You never understood how small I felt next to you." I read it twice. Then I closed it. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. He had resented the very stability I offered. He resented that I had built something before him. He resented that my success existed independent of his. And instead of building beside me, he tried to rewrite me smaller. That night I cried, not because I wanted him back, but because I mourned the time, the years I spent defending him against my parents, the money transferred quietly to his family's account, the evenings I dismissed my intuition because loving him felt easier than questioning him. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's sitting on your kitchen floor at midnight, back against the cabinet, wondering how you mistook ambition for integrity. I hit my lowest point not when I discovered the affair, but when I realized I had tolerated disrespect for far too long because I believed patience was noble. I had confused endurance with strength. And somewhere in that quiet, tear-streaked kitchen, I made a decision. I would never again shrink myself to make someone else feel taller. The real turning point didn't come from a courtroom. It came from a conversation I didn't expect. 3 weeks before the divorce was finalized, my father asked me to meet him for lunch. We hadn't had a real conversation in years, not since the night he warned me about Daniel in his study. Back then, I'd walked out feeling judged, defensive, certain that love required defiance. Now, I walked into the restaurant feeling older. My father looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I won't say I told you so," he said quietly. I almost smiled. "Thank you," I replied. He folded his hands on the table. "I misjudged something." I blinked. "What?" "I thought you were naive," he said. "But you weren't naive. You were loyal." That word hit differently coming from him. "You built him up," he continued. "That wasn't weakness. That was generosity." For years, I had framed my decision to marry Daniel as rebellion, as romance, as choosing love over status. But sitting there, I saw something clearer. I hadn't been foolish. I had been hopeful, and hope isn't shameful. What's shameful is someone weaponizing it. That afternoon, I met with my attorney to review final documents. He confirmed what I already suspected. Daniel would receive nothing beyond his personal belongings and whatever remained in his individual accounts. No alimony, no share of the condo, no compensation. The evidence, especially the documented lies about my health, had shifted the judge's perspective significantly. Reputational harm matters, my attorney said. He damaged you publicly. For the first time, I felt something close to peace. Not revenge. Balance. A week later, Jonathan Bennett called me. I thought you'd want to know, she said. Beatrice Bennett left the firm. Resigned? I asked. More like encouraged to, she replied. HR was involved. There were multiple complaints after everything surfaced. I sat back on my couch, and let that settle. The truth had done its work. I hadn't needed to scream in ballrooms or post evidence online. I hadn't needed dramatic revenge. I simply stopped protecting him, and without my silence shielding him, his actions caught up. The final hearing was brief. Daniel didn't look at me when the judge confirmed the settlement terms. His jaw was tight, pride barely containing frustration. Outside the courthouse, he finally spoke. You really think you're better than me now? He asked. I met his eyes. No, I said calmly. I just stopped thinking I was less. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, there was nothing clever for him to say. That afternoon, I walked into the condo for the last time before listing it for sale. Too many memories, too much history layered into the walls. I decided to move, not because I was running, but because I didn't want my healing tied to a space that carried both love and humiliation. I bought a smaller place closer to my office. Clean lines, neutral walls, no shared decisions embedded in the furniture. When I signed the closing papers, I felt something unfamiliar. Not sadness, not triumph, ownership, not just of property, of myself. I wasn't the woman in the ballroom anymore. I wasn't the wife defending whispers. I wasn't the benefactor hoping gratitude would transform into loyalty. I was simply Olivia. And for the first time in years, that felt enough. Divorce doesn't end with a signature. It echoes. The first echo came from Daniel's firm. David called me 2 weeks after everything was finalized. Word got around, he said carefully. HR reviewed more than just the affair. There were complaints about conduct, comments, boundaries. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. He resigned, David added, or was encouraged to. And Beatrice Bennett, I asked? Gone, he replied. No one wants that kind of liability. I sat at my kitchen table, sunlight falling across new hardwood floors, and realized something simple. When I stopped covering for him, the consequences arrived naturally. No drama, just gravity. Daniel tried to reach me one last time through email. You ruined my career. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. He had ruined it. I had simply stopped pretending otherwise. I didn't respond. His parents called again, softer this time. Daniel's having a hard time finding work, his mother said. Could you reconsider helping? I closed my eyes briefly. For years, I had transferred money without question. I had funded repairs, covered rent, stabilized their shop. I can't, I said gently. I wish you well. There was silence on the other end. They didn't call again. I later heard, through David, through quiet professional circles, that Daniel had struggled to secure another consulting role. The industry is smaller than people think. Reputation travels quickly. The combination of an office affair, a public confrontation, and HR documentation made him a risk. Eventually, I heard he was working in retail management outside the city. It wasn't the glamorous trajectory he had imagined for himself, but it was honest work. And for the first time in years, his success or failure wasn't my responsibility. My own parents reached out differently, not with "we warned you," not with quiet satisfaction, just presence. My mother invited me to dinner one Sunday. No commentary, no judgment, just roast chicken and familiar silverware. Halfway through the meal, she said quietly, "You loved him sincerely." "Yes," I replied. "That's nothing to be ashamed of." It surprised me how much that mattered. At work, something shifted too. For months, I had been distracted, checking my phone during meetings, carrying tension into negotiations. Without that weight, my focus sharpened. My supervisor noticed. "You seem lighter," she said one afternoon, "like you're not carrying something invisible anymore." I almost laughed. I was assigned to lead a major project, one that had previously been offered to someone else. It required travel, strategy, visibility. I accepted without hesitation. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same ambition Daniel once resented was now fueling my own expansion. I ran into him once. It was in a grocery store near the old condo. He was with someone, a woman I didn't recognize. She looked younger, polished. He saw me first. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was no hatred there, just distance. He turned away quickly, guiding the woman down a different aisle. I continued selecting vegetables like nothing had happened. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel longing. I felt neutral. That neutrality was the clearest sign of healing, because indifference is not bitterness. It's release. A few weeks later, the condo officially sold. I signed the final paperwork and handed over the keys. As I walked out of the building lobby for the last time, I paused briefly. not to mourn him, but to acknowledge who I had been inside those walls, the woman who chose love fiercely, defended it stubbornly, endured quietly. She wasn't weak. She was hopeful. And hope, when misplaced, doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. Daniel once told someone I would never leave because I was too invested. He miscalculated something fundamental. I wasn't invested in humiliation. I wasn't invested in erasure. I was invested in partnership. And the moment partnership disappeared, so did I. It's been almost a year now. I still go to diners sometimes. Not the old one, a different place. Brighter, newer, no cracked vinyl seats. I order coffee and pie, sit by the window, and read the news on my phone. No one brings me free slices anymore. I pay for everything myself. And somehow that feels right. People ask if I'm dating. I tell them I'm focused on work. That's true, but it's also simpler than explaining how carefully you learn to trust again after someone rewrites your identity behind your back. I don't hate Daniel. Hate requires energy I no longer owe him. What I feel instead is clarity. I understand now that love is not proven through sacrifice alone. It is not measured by how much you endure. It is not validated by how loudly you defend someone to your family. Real partnership requires mutual respect, transparency, pride in each other, not competition. When Daniel joked about needing a divorce lawyer to protect his assets, he revealed something important. He saw success as ownership. I see it as foundation. And foundations don't crumble when one unstable structure is removed. If there's a lesson here for anyone watching this story unfold, it's this. Pay attention to how someone speaks about you when you're not in the room. Pay attention to whether they celebrate your strength or feel threatened by it. And never confuse loyalty with silence. You can love someone sincerely and still walk away when that love becomes a weapon used against you. I chose him once over my family. This time I chose myself. And that choice, quiet, steady, unannounced, rebuilt more than any marriage ever did.